The doors to the wedding hall opened so suddenly that the string quartet missed an entire measure. At first, only the people closest to the entrance noticed her. A woman in silver stepped across the marble floor with the kind of calm that didn't ask for attention and didn't need permission to take it. Then the whisper spread row by row, table by table, chair by chair, until the whole room was turning, staring, struggling to understand what it was seeing. Because the woman walking into Vincent Kane's wedding was not supposed to be walking at all. She was supposed to be broken. She was supposed to be hidden somewhere in the shadows of a ruined life, buried under pity, silence, and the wreckage of everything she had lost. At least, that was the version Vincent and Natasha had been telling themselves. That was the fantasy they had dressed in white and gold and invited 300 guests to celebrate. But Elena Castellano didn't enter like a woman who had been destroyed. She entered like a verdict. The silver fabric of her gown caught the light with each step, elegant and deliberate, and the heels that clicked against the floor sounded louder than the music ever had. 6 security officers moved with her, not crowding her, not overshadowing her, simply making it clear that no one in that room could touch her unless she allowed it. Heads turned, conversations died, phones appeared in hands. The groom forgot how to breathe, the bride forgot how to smile. At the altar, Vincent went pale so fast it looked as if the blood had drained from him all at once. Natasha's fingers tightened around her bouquet until the white roses bent under the pressure. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them moved. They simply stared. Because the woman they had divorced, mocked, and invited to this wedding as a final insult was no longer the helpless memory they had built their confidence around. She was alive. She was standing. And she looked more powerful than either of them had ever been. The wedding planner rushed toward the musicians, whispering frantically, but the music had already collapsed. Guests were twisting in their seats, leaning into one another, murmuring the same questions. Is that Elena Castellano? How is she walking? Wasn't she paralyzed? Didn't her father's company go bankrupt? Why does she have security? Why does she look like that? Why does she look like she owns the room? And the truth was simple. She did. Elena paused halfway down the aisle, just long enough to let the silence tighten around Vincent's throat. She didn't rush. She didn't need to. Shock was doing the work for her. Every second she stood there, the lie they had lived in for over a year began to crack wider. Vincent had once looked at her in a hospital bed and decided she was finished. Now he was learning what a terrible mistake it is to celebrate someone's ending before you know how their story was written. And before I take you back to the beginning of this mess, do me a quick favor. If you love stories where betrayal gets answered with pure class and unforgettable revenge, hit like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's go back to the moment Elena made the one decision that changed everything. 7 years earlier, before the accident, before the betrayal, before hospital rooms and divorce papers and fake sympathy, Elena Castellano was the kind of woman people noticed without fully understanding why. Yes, she was beautiful. That much was obvious. She had the kind of face magazines loved, the kind of posture photographers didn't have to coach, the kind of effortless grace that made expensive things look ordinary. But beauty alone was never the reason people remembered her. People remembered Elena because she moved through the world with certainty. She knew who she was, she knew what she wanted, and more importantly, she had grown up in a world where power was never abstract. She had seen how money could build cities, shape industries, buy loyalty, expose greed, and change the tone of every room it entered. Her father, Matteo Castellano, hadn't inherited wealth. He had built it, one acquisition at a time, one calculated risk at a time, one impossible decision at a time. By the time Elena was old enough to understand what Castellano Industries really was, it had already become a giant in the tech world. Software, data infrastructure, logistics systems, international partnerships, venture holdings. Her father's company touched nearly every corner of the market. And unlike many rich men who kept their daughters ornamental and uninformed, Matteo brought Elena into everything. At 16, she sat in on board meetings. At 18, she was reviewing quarterly reports over dinner. At 22, she could read a balance sheet faster than most executives twice her age. By 25, she was the kind of woman investors listened to carefully and underestimated only once. Still, for all her intelligence and all her training, Elena had one weakness. She believed love could be pure, even inside a world ruled by strategy. That was how Vincent Kane entered her life. He was brilliant in the way ambitious men often are when they come from nothing and are determined never to return to it. He had a scholarship, sharp suits that were a little too carefully maintained, polished manners, and a hunger in him that Elena mistook for drive, without realizing how often drive and resentment can share the same face. He didn't come from her world. That was part of the appeal. Around Elena, most men either tried too hard to impress her or assumed her last name would do the work for them. Vincent was different, or seemed different. He listened when she spoke. He challenged her ideas without trying to dominate her. He asked questions about her thoughts instead of her money. He made her laugh. He made her feel, for a little while, like she could be loved as a woman and not evaluated as an opportunity. Or so she believed. Their relationship moved fast, the way relationships do when two people are young and one of them is sincere enough for both. Elena brought Vincent into her life carefully at first, then all at once. She introduced him to Natasha Williams, her closest friend since freshman year. She brought him to family dinners. She defended him when older men in tailored suits dismissed him as temporary. She loved him not despite his humble background, but because she believed it had given him character. When Vincent proposed, he made it sound simple and sacred. No performance, no grand spectacle, just him. One knee on the hardwood floor of her apartment, a ring in his shaking hand, telling her that whatever the world thought of her name, he saw the woman underneath it and wanted to spend his life loving her. Elena cried. She said yes before he finished asking. Her father had concerns, though he tried to hide them. Not because Vincent was poor. Matteo Castellano respected people who built themselves from the ground up. He had done it himself. His concern came from instinct, from the kind a father develops after decades of watching faces and learning which smiles are genuine. The night before the wedding, he stood with Elena on the terrace of the family estate while the city lights shimmered below them. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. Elena smiled and slipped her arm through his. "I've never been more sure of anything." Matteo looked out at the skyline for a long moment before nodding. "Then I hope he deserves you." She thought he did. Their wedding was elegant but intimate. Elena wanted something warm, not extravagant. She wore ivory silk. Vincent wore black. Natasha stood beside Elena as maid of honor, smiling through tears, hugging her tightly before the ceremony. Later, Elena would remember that hug and wonder if Natasha had envied her even then. Married life began beautifully enough. They bought a home with wide windows and clean lines, modern but warm. Vincent rose early and kissed her forehead before work. Elena took meetings, traveled, learned more of the company, spent evenings curled up with him on the couch, discussing plans and dreams and the future they imagined building together. For a while, it looked real. For a while, Vincent played the role so well that even Elena's instincts rested. Then her father died. The heart attack struck without warning during a board meeting. One moment, Matteo Castellano was arguing over a proposed expansion. The next, he was on the floor. By the time Elena reached the hospital, he was gone. Grief didn't arrive like a wave. It arrived like the collapse of gravity. It made food tasteless, mornings unbearable, silence dangerous. Elena had lost more than a father. She had lost the one person who knew exactly what it meant to carry the Castellano name, and the one person who had always made that burden feel less lonely. The funeral drew everyone: executives, politicians, founders, old friends, rivals, journalists, men who had once doubted him and now called him visionary, women who had admired him, partners from overseas, board members with solemn faces and careful condolences. Elena stood through all of it as if her body had become a shell designed to remain upright while her heart did whatever it needed to do in private. Vincent stayed beside her the entire time. His hand rested at the small of her back. His voice stayed low and gentle. He answered questions when she couldn't. He guided her through the receiving line. He looked from every angle like the husband every grieving woman would pray for. And for a few precious weeks after the funeral, Elena believed she was lucky. A month later, the first crack appeared. She was in her father's study, reviewing transition documents, when Vincent walked in without knocking. The room still smelled faintly of leather, old paper, and the cologne Matteo used to wear. Elena was surrounded by files, legal folders, financial summaries, leadership recommendations, and transition reports that would determine how Castellano Industries moved forward. "We need to talk," Vincent said. There was something in his tone that made her set her pen down immediately. "Okay," she replied. "What's wrong?" He sat across from her, posture rigid, expression composed in a way that felt rehearsed. "You're carrying too much," he said. "Your father just died. You're grieving, and now you're trying to lead a billion-dollar company through a leadership transition. It's too much for one person." Elena nodded slowly. "It is a lot, but I'm handling it." His jaw tightened. "Barely." She looked at him carefully. "What are you really trying to say?" Vincent leaned forward. "Transfer operational control to me." The room went still. For a second, Elena thought she must have misunderstood him. "What?" "Let me run the company," he said, more directly now. "Not permanently if you don't want that, but long enough for you to recover emotionally. You can stay involved, you can sign off on major decisions, but I should be leading this. I'm your husband. I should be helping you carry this family." Elena stared at him. This wasn't support. It wasn't concern. It was a reach. A naked one. "Vincent," she said carefully, "this is not a family bakery or a small investment portfolio. This is Castellano Industries." "Exactly. My father spent 30 years building it. I've trained for this my whole life. And I have a business degree," he snapped. "You have an MBA and 2 years of entry-level experience." His eyes flashed. She kept going, because truth was still truth, no matter how uncomfortable it made the room. "I have been in these rooms since I was 16. I know the people, the structure, the vulnerabilities, the culture, the acquisitions, the legal history, the long-term strategy. This isn't about me being emotional. This is about protecting something my father entrusted to me."
Vincent stood so suddenly the chair legs scraped hard against the floor. "So you don't trust me?" "This isn't about trust." "Isn't it?" he said, voice rising. "I'm your husband. A wife is supposed to lean on her husband." Elena stood too, slow and steady. A husband is supposed to support his wife, not try to take control of what was left to her. For one long second, he said nothing. Then his face changed. It was subtle, but Elena saw it. Something warm closed. Something cold stepped forward. "We'll see," he said quietly. He walked out, and the door shut harder than it needed to. Elena stood in the center of her father's study and felt, for the first time, something dark moving under the surface of her marriage. She wanted to believe it was stress. She wanted to believe grief was distorting everything. She wanted to believe love could survive wounded pride. But some truths do not enter your life with noise. They enter with stillness. A look, a sentence, a shift in tone. A moment you replay later and realize was the beginning of the end. Over the next several months, Vincent changed. He didn't explode. Men like Vincent rarely do at first. They cool. They withdraw. They become polite in ways that feel more punishing than anger. He asked fewer questions about her day, but his silence had weight.
He stopped pretending interest in the company, while never fully hiding how much it bothered him. He grew sharper, smaller, more brittle. Elena kept trying to bridge the distance. She invited him into decisions, asked for his opinions, suggested weekends away, bought concert tickets, canceled meetings for dinners he barely attended emotionally. Nothing helped. And Natasha, without Elena noticing the timing at first, began appearing more often. Natasha was easy to trust because she had always been there. College heartbreaks, graduation, first apartments, late-night calls, bad dates, wedding planning, grief. Natasha had been present for every chapter. She knew Elena's habits, fears, ambitions, and blind spots. She knew how to sound comforting. She knew how to ask just enough questions to be invited closer. One afternoon, while Elena packed for a trip to Tokyo, Natasha sat cross-legged on the bed watching her fold blazers into a suitcase. "He seems unhappy," Natasha said lightly. Elena didn't look up right away. "Who?" "Vincent." Elena sighed. "We're going through a rough patch." "Because of the company?" Elena zipped one compartment and nodded. "He wants more control than I'm willing to give." Natasha tilted her head. "That must be hard for him." Elena glanced at her. "Hard for him?" Natasha lifted one shoulder. "I'm just saying, for some men, being married to a woman that powerful can be complicated." Elena frowned. "Why should my success make him feel threatened?" "It shouldn't," Natasha said quickly. "I just mean maybe he feels unnecessary." The words stayed with Elena after Natasha left. Unnecessary. It framed Vincent's resentment as something Elena had caused by being too capable, too strong, too accomplished. It subtly invited guilt into a space where guilt didn't belong. And Elena, tired and grieving and still trying to save something she loved, let that guilt sit longer than she should have. In Tokyo, Elena closed a major expansion deal her father had dreamed of for years. It should have been a triumphant moment. The Japanese partnership would open new markets, stabilize international growth, and prove to every skeptic that she was exactly the leader Matteo had believed she could become. She wanted to call Vincent the second the agreement was signed. She wanted to hear pride in his voice.
Instead, when she got home, the house was empty. A note on the counter told her he was out with friends and not to wait up. She stood in the silent kitchen, jet-lagged and emotionally hollow, looking at the note as if it might rearrange itself into something less lonely. It didn't.
What Elena didn't know was that while she was in Tokyo, Natasha had come over. Vincent had been drinking in the living room, tie loose, shirt collar open, the television on mute. Natasha sat beside him, close enough for her knee to touch his.
"You look miserable," she said.
Vincent laughed once, bitterly. "That obvious?"
"She doesn't see you," Natasha said gently.
That was all it took. One sentence. Not because it was true, but because it gave Vincent a story he wanted to believe. He started talking. About feeling sidelined. About how Elena never truly leaned on him. About how she treated him like an accessory to her empire. About how her world had no place for him unless he accepted standing in her shadow. Natasha listened with the devotion of a woman who had spent years waiting for the right fracture to appear.
"She doesn't know what she has," Natasha whispered.
Vincent looked at her then. Really looked. And when Natasha kissed him, the first time was brief, the second time was longer, and by the third, whatever loyalty Vincent had once promised Elena had already become something negotiable. Their affair began in secrecy and quickly found excuses. It happened during Elena's business trips. It happened in hotel bars when Natasha claimed she was meeting friends nearby. It happened in Elena's own house when staff had gone for the day. At first, they told themselves it was emotion. Then they called it inevitability. Then they stopped calling it anything at all. Betrayal gets easier for people once they choose comfort over conscience. Natasha confessed she had always loved Vincent. Vincent said Elena had changed. Natasha said Elena made him feel small. Vincent said Natasha understood him. Together, they built a version of reality where they were not disloyal people doing a selfish thing, but misunderstood people claiming the happiness they deserved. And then greed joined the romance. One night, lying in the bed Vincent shared with his wife, Natasha traced circles on his chest and said, "If you divorce her, you could walk away with half." Vincent looked at the ceiling. "You think so?" "Community property," Natasha murmured. "Marital assets, shared wealth. With good lawyers, why not?" Vincent was quiet. Half of Elena's world. Half of the empire he had once tried to take with permission. The idea burrowed into him and stayed there. He started asking careful questions. Not enough to raise suspicion. Just enough to learn the structures, holdings, timelines, exposure points. He watched Elena's schedule. He studied her stress. He became patient in the way opportunistic people become patient, when they think timing will make theft look lawful. But life has a way of introducing timing no one can control. 3 weeks later, Elena flew to Seattle for a facilities review and investor meetings. The return drive to the airport should have been routine. It wasn't. A truck driver crossed the line at highway speed after falling asleep at the wheel. Elena's car spun, flipped, and slammed into concrete hard enough to twist the frame into something unrecognizable. Glass sprayed like rain. Metal screamed. Airbags burst. Then there was silence, punctured by pain so fierce it blurred the world at the edges. When paramedics pulled her free, Elena was conscious just long enough to say the words that would echo through the next year of her life. "I can't feel my legs." She was stabilized in Seattle and flown home to a private hospital. There were broken ribs, lacerations, swelling around the spine, internal bruising, and severe trauma to her lower back. The prognosis was uncertain. That kind of uncertainty terrifies good people and tempts bad ones. Vincent received the call while Natasha was at the house. He listened, asked the necessary questions, thanked the administrator, hung up. Natasha stood in the doorway with her arms folded. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Spinal injury," Vincent said. "They don't know if she'll walk again." The silence between them changed shape. If Elena died, Vincent could inherit. If Elena lived but was severely disabled, a divorce would become ethically ugly, but greed rarely retreats just because compassion would be expected. "You should go to the hospital," Natasha said after a moment. "People will notice if you don't." So he went. The hospital room was dim when he arrived. Elena was asleep, exhausted from surgery, pain medication, and shock. Vincent stood at the foot of the bed and looked at her. No grief crossed his face. No panic. No tenderness. Only calculation. He stepped into the hallway and called Natasha. Inside the room, Elena stirred. The medication had begun wearing off. Pain dragged her back toward consciousness in sharp waves. She was about to reach for the call button when she heard Vincent's voice through the partially open door. "I'm at the hospital," he said. "She's sleeping." Natasha asked something Elena couldn't hear clearly. "Broken," Vincent replied. There was a pause. Then his next words changed Elena forever. "Honestly, I wish she'd died in the accident." Pain does strange things to time. Later, Elena would remember that moment as both endless and instant. Endless because every syllable seemed to arrive separately. Impossible. Monstrous. Instant because in one sentence, an entire marriage burned down so completely there was nothing left to salvage. Vincent kept talking. If she died, the empire would be mine. No divorce, no fight, no lawyers. Clean and simple. Natasha said something low. "No," Vincent continued, his irritation sharpening. "Now I'm stuck. If she can't walk, I either stay with a crippled wife for appearances, or I leave and look like a monster. Either way, it's a mess." Inside the room, Elena stared at the ceiling and listened to the man she had loved discuss her possible death as a missed financial opportunity. That was the moment grief turned into clarity. Not rage first, not tears first. Clarity. She saw everything at once. The request for control, the distance, the coldness, Natasha's subtle words, the loneliness, the disappearing affection, the empty kitchen, the sharpened resentment hiding beneath his smile. All of it. By the time Vincent returned to the room wearing concern like a costume, Elena had already made her first decision. She closed her eyes and pretended to be asleep. He touched her arm and murmured something gentle. She felt sick at the sound of it. Later that night, when her doctor came in to assess her sensation and mobility, Elena asked the question that mattered. "Tell me the truth," she whispered. "Will I walk again?" The doctor, a calm woman in her 50s with intelligent eyes, explained that it was too soon to know for certain. The swelling needed to go down. Rehabilitation would be intensive, but there was real hope. A strong chance, even, that with treatment and therapy, Elena could regain most, possibly all, of her mobility. Relief hit Elena so hard it nearly brought her to tears. Then, strategy followed it. "When my husband asks," Elena said slowly, "tell him the worst." The doctor frowned. "I'm sorry?" "Tell him it looks permanent." "I can't lie about your condition." I'm not asking for a false diagnosis, Elena said. I'm asking you to give him the worst-case outlook while the swelling is still severe. You said yourself it's too early to know. The doctor studied her face for a long moment. Something in Elena's eyes must have told the story she couldn't yet say aloud. This is irregular, the doctor said. I know. And potentially dangerous. I know. Why? Elena swallowed hard. Because I need to know exactly who I'm married to before I decide what to do next. The doctor was silent. Then she nodded once. When he asks, she said carefully, I'll tell him the prognosis appears poor and long-term disability is likely. It was enough. And before I tell you what Elena did with that information, if you're enjoying the way this story is unfolding, this is your reminder to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this only get better when the truth starts catching up to the people who ran from it. The next day, Elena began making calls. Not emotional calls, not calls to friends who would pity her. Strategic calls. She contacted 5 people her father had trusted for years. James Harrison, the company's chief legal advisor, Patricia Morrison, the lead financial strategist, Robert Klein, general operations director, David Strong, the wealth manager overseeing complex holdings, and Michelle Torres, Elena's personal assistant and the one person outside the family who knew how Matteo Castellano liked things done. They joined a secure conference call from different offices, homes, and boardrooms. They were concerned. They were relieved to hear her voice. They expected instructions related to recovery or temporary leadership. What they got instead stunned them into silence. I need Castellano Industries to appear bankrupt, Elena said. No one spoke for a full 3 seconds. Then Harrison said, very slowly, Elena, I need you to repeat that. I need the world to believe the company collapsed, she said. Total liquidation, massive debt, structural failure, insolvency. I want the narrative clean, devastating, and airtight. Patricia was the first to recover enough to object. The market reaction alone would be catastrophic. Not if the real assets are already protected before the story breaks, Elena replied. I want every critical holding shielded through legal structures Vincent can't touch. Trusts, deferred entities, offshore protections if necessary, but compliant and locked down. Move fast, quietly. Preserve the business, the jobs, and the contracts. Burn only the illusion. David exhaled softly. You're baiting someone. My husband, Elena said, and the woman he's sleeping with. Silence again. This time it was heavier. No one on that call asked if she was sure. Matteo Castellano had built a culture where precision mattered, and Elena now sounded exactly like his daughter. What's the goal? Harrison asked. Proof, Elena said. I know what he is. Now I need to know how far he'll go when he believes I'm helpless and poor. The team moved. Within days, carefully staged financial signals began surfacing. Anonymous leaks, industry chatter, analysts raising eyebrows, reports of debt exposure, speculation around overextension after Matteo's death. Quiet concern from minor outlets that became louder concern from major ones. Then, a cascade. Financial media loves a fall from grace, especially when the company in question has spent years towering over competitors. Within a week, the world believed Castellano Industries had imploded under pressure. Commentators called it tragic. Rivals called it inevitable. Investors mourned what they thought was the end of an empire. Employees, protected quietly in the background, saw no interruption in payroll, no operational panic, no real damage, because Elena's team had done exactly what she asked. Only the image burned. Meanwhile, Elena lay in bed and waited. She also instructed her team not to protect the joint account she shared with Vincent. $3 million sat there, accessible, visible. A test. She wanted to know whether Vincent would take money from the woman he believed had already lost everything. 5 days passed. Vincent did not return. He did not ask about experimental rehabilitation. He did not consult specialists. He did not sit beside her bed and promise to fight with her. He stayed away. On the 7th day, Harrison called. He emptied the joint account this morning, he said. All of it. Wired to an individual account in his name. Elena closed her eyes. Even when you expect betrayal, confirmation hurts in a very specific way. It kills the last fragment of hope that maybe, somehow, you were wrong. I understand, she said quietly. I'm sorry, Harrison replied. No, Elena said after a moment. Don't be. Now we know. That afternoon, Vincent finally came to the hospital, and Natasha came with him. They didn't try to hide themselves properly anymore. Natasha's hand rested on Vincent's arm as if it belonged there. Their bodies leaned toward each other. Their expressions were sober, but not sorrowful. They looked less like two people arriving for a difficult conversation and more like two people concluding a deal. Vincent closed the door behind him. Natasha remained standing near the foot of the bed. Elena, still weak, still in pain, still physically dependent on the staff around her, looked at them and felt the last of her old life detach from her completely. We need to talk, Vincent said. He removed divorce papers from inside his jacket and dropped them across her blanket. No warmth, no hesitation, no shame. He spoke in a tone so cold it sounded almost efficient. The doctors were clear. You're not going to walk again. And the company is gone. Completely gone. There's nothing left to save. Elena said nothing. Vincent took her silence as weakness. I can't spend my life tied to someone who's become a dead weight, he said. You're broken, Elena. Physically, financially, emotionally. This marriage is over. Natasha stepped in with her carefully measured voice. This is for the best, she said softly. You need to focus on healing, and Vincent deserves the chance to move forward with someone who can really be a partner. A lesser woman might have screamed. A less disciplined woman might have thrown the papers back in their faces. Elena did neither. Because she had already shifted from wife to witness, from victim to strategist. She signed. Her hand trembled, but not from fear. It trembled from restraint. From the sheer force required not to reveal what she knew. Not to tell them that every word, every movement, every theft was being mentally catalogued for the day they would stand defenseless in the truth. Vincent took the papers without looking into her eyes. Natasha paused at the door and offered a final expression meant to resemble pity. I hope you find peace, she said. Then they left together. Elena stared at the ceiling until the door clicked shut. Then she turned her face into the pillow and let herself cry exactly once. Not because she wanted Vincent back. That illusion was dead. She cried for the version of herself who had loved blindly, for the father who was no longer alive to see what kind of man Vincent had been, for the friendship she now understood had been rotting long before it broke, for the body she needed to rebuild, for the humiliation she had just survived without flinching. Then she stopped. And from that moment on, she became ruthless about recovery. Physical therapy began sooner than most expected. The pain was brutal. The exhaustion was worse. Progress came in humiliating fragments, one twitch, one shift,
One assisted movement, one trembling attempt to bear weight, one exhausted collapse, then another attempt, then another. Elena approached rehab the way her father approached business, with discipline, patience, and total refusal to confuse delay with defeat. Most people never knew how hard those months really were. They did not see the sweat on her neck after parallel bar sessions. They did not hear the sounds she made trying to move muscles that felt disconnected from her own body. They did not watch her gripping the edge of a chair so hard her knuckles blanched while she forced herself upright. They did not see her fall. They only saw the silence she kept. The divorce finalized quickly because Elena contested nothing. Publicly, it looked pathetic. The crippled heiress abandoned by her husband after her father's company collapsed. The tabloids, half-informed and eager, did what tabloids always do. They made her tragedy into a cautionary spectacle.
Vincent, on the other hand, adapted quickly. With the $3 million he had stolen, he relocated to a smaller city, launched a real estate development firm, and carefully rewrote his own image. He framed himself as resilient, self-made. A man who had endured a difficult marriage, stepped away from chaos, and rebuilt his life from scratch. Because most people never check where success began, if the suit is expensive and the smile is confident. Natasha joined him openly within weeks. Within months, she was appearing beside him at business dinners, charity functions, launch parties, and networking events. Each time wearing the expression of a woman who believed she had won. They got engaged before the year ended. And because cruelty often seeks an audience, they sent Elena an invitation. The envelope was cream with gold lettering. Expensive, tasteful, poisonous. Vincent Kane and Natasha Williams request the honor of your presence at their wedding. Inside, folded neatly, was a handwritten note from Natasha. Elena, we know this past year has been difficult for you, but we wanted to include you in our happiness. The venue is fully wheelchair accessible. We made sure of it. Please come. Elena read the note 3 times. Then she smiled. Not because it was funny, because it was useful. They wanted her there because they believed humiliation was safe. They wanted witnesses to their version of the story. They wanted the broken ex-wife in the wheelchair, the cautionary ghost in the back row, proof that their betrayal had led to something prettier and more successful. They wanted a symbol of what they thought they had escaped. Instead, they had invited judgment into their own ceremony. Elena called Michelle. "Book the jet," she said. "Arrange security. Pull the Valentino from Milan. And clear my schedule for the weekend." Michelle didn't ask questions. "Yes, ma'am." By then, Elena was walking again. Not perfectly at first, not publicly. Only her medical team, her inner legal circle, Michelle, and 2 security staff knew the full truth. Elena kept the rest private. There was no strategic advantage in announcing her recovery early. Vincent and Natasha were relaxed because they believed the story was over. People make mistakes when they feel safe. Elena spent the final weeks before the wedding preparing with astonishing calm. Harrison reviewed every legal angle. Patricia assembled documentation on the staged collapse and the preserved assets. David traced the path of the stolen funds into Vincent's company. Michelle coordinated logistics. Private investigators quietly compiled timelines, messages, transfers, and corroborating details that would be useful if Vincent attempted denial. Elena also chose not to strike too early. That was perhaps the most difficult part. She could have destroyed Vincent long before the wedding. She had enough information to expose him, bankrupt him, and humiliate him months ahead of schedule. But timing matters. Public truth has greatest force when it detonates inside the lie people were most proud of. So she waited. She healed. She trained. She let them build the stage. And then she arrived to use it. If you've made it this far, you already know this is the kind of story where patience hits harder than anger ever could. So if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe, because the ending is exactly the kind of public reckoning nobody ever forgets. On the morning of the wedding, Elena's private jet landed just after sunrise. Ground crews recognized the tail number and exchanged confused looks. Castellano Industries was supposed to be gone. That, too, pleased Elena. Let the confusion start early. A black motorcade took her from the airport to the hotel where hair, makeup, and styling had been arranged with military precision. Her gown shimmered like liquid silver. Her heels were custom-fitted for comfort and balance. Her jewelry was understated but unmistakably expensive. She did not want to look flashy. She wanted to look inevitable. In the mirror, she hardly recognized the woman staring back. Not because she looked different, but because she looked distilled. Burned clean of illusion. Sharper than before. Softer in some places, harder in the important ones. As her security detail checked routes and timing, Michelle fastened Elena's bracelet and met her eyes in the mirror. "Are you ready?" Michelle asked. Elena stood. Smoothly, without assistance. She looked at her own reflection for one more second and said, "I've been ready for a year." At the venue, Vincent was adjusting his tie and admiring himself in a full-length mirror. His business had grown modestly but visibly. He had investors now, partners, contracts in negotiation. New money admired confidence, and Vincent had built his entire second life around projecting it. Today, he intended to seal that life in front of 300 witnesses. Natasha floated between makeup artists, bridesmaids, and nervous laughter. She looked beautiful in the practiced, expensive way magazines like to call radiant. But beneath the polish, she was restless. "Do you think she'll come?" she asked. Vincent smirked. "No." Natasha glanced at him. "You don't think she'd want to make a scene?"
"With what?" Vincent said. "A wheelchair?"
He laughed at his own cruelty. Then, seeing hesitation remain on Natasha's face, he softened his tone. "If she does come, good. Let her. People will see the difference between what I left behind and what I chose." Natasha smiled because she wanted to believe him. But some part of her, however small, remembered Elena too well to feel entirely safe. Guests took their seats. Investors mingled. Champagne moved on trays. Musicians tuned strings. The officiant checked his notes. Conversations swelled and settled in waves of expectation. And then the doors opened. Elena entered. For a few seconds, no one in that room understood what they were seeing. It wasn't just that she was walking. It was the way she was walking. Not tentative, not fragile, not thankful merely to be upright. She moved with total control, as if every step had been written into history long before the doors ever opened. Her chin was lifted. Her expression was serene. The security around her made it clear she had not come to beg for dignity. She had come carrying it in such abundance that the room shifted around her. Vincent turned, froze, and forgot the shape of his own face. Natasha's bouquet trembled. One of the musicians lowered her instrument completely. A phone screen lit up in the third row. Then another. Then another. Elena reached the front and stopped. The master of ceremonies, young and underprepared for this kind of disaster, approached with a microphone in both hands, like he wasn't sure whether he was helping a guest or handing a weapon to a queen. Ms. Castellano, he stammered. Would you like to say a few words? Elena took the microphone. Her fingers closed around it with easy familiarity. She had spoken in shareholder meetings, international conferences, memorials, negotiations, and press briefings. A wedding full of small liars and nervous investors did not frighten her. "Thank you," she said. Her voice carried effortlessly. Every conversation died. "I apologize for interrupting the ceremony," she continued. "But when I received an invitation to this wedding, I felt it would be inappropriate not to attend. After all, some moments are too revealing to miss." Vincent stepped forward. Elena, she lifted one finger, not even looking at him, and he stopped. The room noticed. That alone embarrassed him. 13 months ago, Elena said, turning slightly so all 300 guests could see her clearly. I was in a catastrophic car accident. I suffered spinal trauma severe enough that doctors initially believed I might never walk again. A hush settled so deep it became almost physical. My husband at the time visited me in the hospital, she said. And while I was lying in bed, unable to move, I overheard him in the hallway telling his girlfriend that he wished I had died in the crash. Gasps tore through the room. Vincent opened his mouth. Natasha's face lost color. Elena continued before either of them could recover. He said that if I had died, he could inherit my father's empire without the inconvenience of divorce. Now the silence became electric. The girlfriend he was speaking to was my best friend since college, Elena said. The woman in the white dress standing beside him. Someone in the back whispered, "Oh my God." Someone near the aisle started recording more obviously. Someone else lowered their champagne glass very, very slowly. Vincent found his voice first. "That's not what happened." Elena finally looked at him. It was not an angry look. That made it worse. "It is exactly what happened," she said. "And because I heard every word, I made several decisions." She turned back to the crowd. "First, I allowed him to believe the worst about my condition. I needed to know what kind of man I had married. Would he stand beside me while I recovered? Would he support me? Would he show loyalty, compassion, patience, even basic decency?" She paused. "He divorced me in my hospital bed." There was no movement anywhere in the room. No coughs, no whispers, no shifting chairs. Just listening. "He called me dead weight," Elena said. "He told me I was broken. He told me I brought nothing to the marriage. And while he was doing that, he had already transferred every dollar from our joint account into an account solely under his control." All eyes swung to Vincent. The groom who had spent the last year selling himself as a disciplined entrepreneur suddenly looked like what he really was. A man whose confidence had always depended on who he thought he could stand on. Natasha tried to recover. "You were bankrupt," she said, voice shaking. "You had nothing left." Elena smiled. "Ah, the bankruptcy." A few people in the audience straightened visibly. Investors listen differently when money enters the sentence. "Yes," Elena said. "That was my second decision. After hearing my husband wish for my death so he could take what my father built, I instructed my legal and financial team to create the appearance of total corporate collapse." A ripple moved through the guests. "You faked it?" someone blurted. Elena didn't even turn toward the voice. "I protected it," she said. "Every real asset, every job, every contract, every core holding. Castellano Industries never actually fell. Only the illusion did." The room erupted in whispers. Vincent's expression broke. Not with guilt, with fear. Because now he understood. The story he had built his second life on had depended entirely on Elena being ruined. And Elena was standing in front of him, very much not ruined. The public collapse, Elena went on, served one purpose. It revealed who was waiting to profit from my vulnerability. She turned her head just enough to include Natasha in the edge of her gaze. And the results were extremely informative. Vincent tried again. This is manipulation. Elena nodded once. Yes, it was. Because I was dealing with manipulators. A few guests actually exhaled in disbelief at the precision of it. Then Elena delivered the blow that mattered most to the roomful of investors. The $3 million Vincent stole from our joint account became the seed money for the company he now claims he built from nothing, she said. The company many people in this room have invested in, partnered with, or are currently negotiating contracts with. If the room had been tense before, now it snapped. Men in suits stared at Vincent as if seeing him for the first time. Women who had nodded through his speeches at fundraising dinners looked suddenly nauseated. One man in the second row actually pulled out his phone and stepped into the aisle before Elena had finished speaking. Is that true? Another investor said sharply. Vincent's lips moved, but whatever answer he tried to form died under the weight of the facts and the number of witnesses now watching him drown. Elena didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. I'm not here because I wanted revenge, she said, though a faint smile touched her mouth. At least, not only revenge. I'm here because character matters. Loyalty matters. The way people behave when you are weak matters more than anything they say when you are strong. She let that settle. Never trust a man who abandons his wife in a hospital bed and calls it practicality. Never trust a woman who comforts her best friend with one hand while reaching for her life with the other. And never build a business with people whose first real investment was betrayal. That line landed like thunder. Phones were everywhere now. Messages were flying. Investors were no longer watching a scandal. They were recalculating risk in real time. One of Vincent's partners stood up. Vincent, he said loudly, we need to freeze our agreement immediately. Another voice followed. The funding conversation is over. Then another. Legal needs to review where your capitalization came from. Natasha grabbed Vincent's arm. Say something. But there was nothing he could say that would survive the room. Because the truth about people like Vincent is this. They are powerful only as long as the audience has incomplete information. Once the full story enters the room, their posture collapses faster than their lies. Elena handed the microphone back to the stunned MC. He accepted it with both hands like it might still be hot. Then Elena turned and walked back down the aisle. Every head followed her. Not in pity, in awe. The same aisle Vincent and Natasha had meant to use for celebration had become a corridor of exposure. Elena moved through it untouched, unconcerned, absolute. Her security detail fell in behind her. Guests leaned away instinctively, not because they feared her physically, but because conviction has a kind of radius around it. Behind her, the wedding disintegrated. Voices rose, chairs scraped. Someone shouted for a lawyer. Natasha began crying in earnest now, mascara streaking. Vincent pulled out his phone, then another phone, then looked around as if he might somehow speak control back into existence. But control had never really belonged to him. It had belonged to Elena's silence, and she had just ended it. Outside, the air was bright and clean. Elena reached the car waiting for her at the curb. Before getting in, she looked back once at the venue doors. From inside came the muffled sound of panic and the unmistakable collapse of certainty. Michelle opened the rear door. Elena slid inside. The car pulled away. For a few moments, no one spoke. Then Elena's phone rang. Harrison. "It's spreading fast," he said the second she answered. "Clips are already online. Financial reporters are picking it up. 2 of his investors have contacted counsel, and someone has apparently alerted authorities to potential fraud exposure linked to the origin of his startup funds." Elena looked out the window as the venue shrank behind them. "Good," she said. There was a pause. Then Harrison asked, softly, "How do you feel?" Elena thought about the hospital room, about the ceiling tiles she stared at while pain hollowed her out, about the phone call in the hallway, about the divorce papers on her blanket, about the parallel bars in rehab, about the invitation, about the way Vincent's face looked when she stepped through those doors walking. And she answered with complete honesty. Free. That afternoon, the wedding never resumed. Caterers began demanding payment assurances. Vendors wanted signatures. Security requested direction. Guests left in clusters, whispering. Several investors headed straight to their attorneys. The officiant packed up and disappeared. Natasha locked herself in the bridal suite, sobbing into a white towel, while her bridesmaids stood around her in numb silence. Vincent spent the next several hours cycling through denial, rage, threats, frantic calls, and increasingly desperate attempts to frame Elena as unstable, vindictive, manipulative, anything except truthful. But timing was against him. Documentation existed. Money trails existed. Witnesses existed. And worst of all for him, Elena had not appeared emotional or chaotic. She had appeared composed, measured, credible. People believe calm power more than frantic defense. By evening, business blogs were carrying the story. By night, mainstream financial outlets had picked it up. By the next morning, Vincent's company was in free fall. Meetings were canceled. Partnerships paused. Accounts reviewed. Due diligence reopened. People who had praised his resilience 24 hours earlier were suddenly unwilling to return his calls. Natasha tried, privately, to convince him they could still survive it together. But relationships born in betrayal rarely endure exposure. Once the thrill of secrecy dies, all that remains is the character of the people involved. And neither Vincent nor Natasha had enough character to stand inside ruin without blaming the other. He accused her of pushing him. She accused him of cowardice. He said she had always been jealous of Elena. She said he had always wanted Elena's money more than either woman. By the end of the week, they were no longer speaking except through anger. Elena, meanwhile, returned to work. Not publicly at first, not dramatically, just steadily. Castellano Industries, long shielded from the false collapse, resumed visible strength through controlled disclosures, renewed market confidence, and carefully timed announcements. Analysts who had declared the company dead began backtracking on television. Competitors who had celebrated too early went quiet. Employees who had been protected throughout the storm realized, many for the first time, the scale of what Elena had done to preserve them. Some called it brilliant. Some called it ruthless. Her father would have called it necessary. In private, Elena visited his grave 2 weeks after the wedding. The morning was still. No cameras, no staff, no spectacle. She brought white lilies because he used to say roses were too obvious. Standing there, she let herself be still in a way she rarely allowed. "I protected it," she said softly. "Everything you built." Wind moved through the trees. She smiled through tears that didn't fall. "You were right about him." The confession hurt, but not the way it once would have. Some truths stop wounding once they've finished teaching you. "I wasn't weak," she whispered. "Just wrong. And I won't be wrong like that again." Then she stepped back, straightened, and walked away on legs that had once been declared finished. That was the real ending, if you think about it. Not the wedding, not the exposure, not the investors backing out, not the public humiliation. Those were consequences. The real ending happened when Elena stopped measuring herself by what had been taken from her and started measuring herself by what she had survived without losing her mind, her dignity, or her ability to rise. Because that was the part Vincent never understood. He thought power was possession. Elena learned power was endurance. He thought wealth meant access. She learned wealth meant discernment. He thought she was dangerous only when she had her father, her company, and her public image. He never imagined how dangerous she would become after betrayal stripped away every illusion and left only the strongest parts of her behind. And maybe that's the lesson sitting underneath all of this. People will misjudge you by your worst moment. They will study your pain and assume it is your final form. They will watch you fall and begin planning their victory before you've even hit the ground. Let them. Let them get comfortable. Let them mistake your silence for surrender. Let them build entire futures around the fantasy that you are finished. Then heal in private. Learn in private. Plan in private. And when the time is right, walk back into the room so completely transformed that their own certainty becomes the instrument of their destruction. That is exactly what Elena did. And that is why Vincent never really lost at the wedding. He lost the day he looked at a woman in a hospital bed and saw an opportunity instead of a human being. Everything after that was just the bill coming due. And if Elena's story taught you anything about betrayal, patience, self-respect, or the danger of underestimating someone who has nothing left to fear, drop your biggest lesson in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, with powerful endings, unforgettable twists, and justice served with style, make sure you like this video and subscribe, because the next story might hit even harder.